BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. It is expanding this multipolar alliance, this alliance that many observers has said is the principal institution that's going to configure a pathway out of US dollar domination. There have been discussions, especially on the Russian side and the Chinese side, but really among all of these countries in the alliance, to create a new currency, that is based on a basket of currencies pegged to the commodities of these commodity-rich nations. This alliance is critical and it's growing, and there's huge news regarding it. And it's not just the fact that you've had a lot of bilateral relations immensely grow and progress in the last several months. You've had Brazil, Lula da Silva, the president of Brazil, visit Beijing and say, why do we need to be on the US dollar? Why do we need to be dominated by it? China and Brazil have agreed to clear trade settlements in the respective currencies of their own countries. You've had Russia over the last year plus talk about de-dollarization and partner with a host of countries along those lines. China, the same way. And BRICS is also set to expand. You have Iran, Argentina, you have Saudi Arabia, you have countries all over the world looking to join the African continent. You have Algeria, you have countries all over the world looking to join the BRICS Express, looking to get on the BRICS Express. But some doubt the power of this alliance. There are some, especially in the collective West, who doubt it. They talk about Russia and China being sub-imperialist. They talk about Russia and China being, no better than the United States and the collective West. Then you also have the naysayers that all of these countries, they are not going to be able to navigate the complexities of undoing dollar domination. But this misses a key point, and that is, before you can do something as immense as dropping the US dollar in all of global trade, you need to build the ship. You need to have a ship to do that with. That is what multipolarity is. It's the ship from which these countries are going to develop their sovereignty, increase their sovereignty, and BRICS is a huge part of this. And the reason why it's so huge is because you have all the richest countries in the world, the legitimately richest countries, not the countries around the world like the United States, Britain, the UK, Western Europe, not these countries which have stolen from the world, but you have legitimately the richest countries in the world in terms of their commodities, in terms of how much they've been able to grow and develop based on what internally they possess and how they conduct relations externally differently from the United States and its collective West vassals. These countries are growing, whether it's China or India. These countries make up a huge portion of the global GDP now, and there's huge news in this regard. And I want to show you what the Silk Road Briefing, which is a great resource for those who are looking to get more information about the Belt and Road Initiative, right? The new Silk Road. But this is what the Silk Road Briefing had to say about where BRICS is at. And this is about a month old, but it's still very relevant. The BRICS alliance has overtaken the G7 in global GDP. The India-based Meg Updates platform, one of the world's largest online international platforms in terms of views, has stated that BRICS countries have officially overtaken the G7 in a share of world purchasing power parity, GDP, and that this trend is expected to continue. So here you have a graph. Look at this incredible graph, okay? So this is the years, right? Measured in every 5 years, 5-year intervals. And then here you have percent of GDP globally. And here you have BRICS. This line is going up. And here you have the G7 down from 45% now to just a bit under 30% going down. So the BRICS currently include Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, while the G7 is Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, and the United States, as well as the European Union. And BRICS is expanding, they say. Bangladesh, Egypt, and the UAE have just joined the BRICS New Development Bank, and numerous other countries are poised to do the same. And Saudi Arabia, of course, is big on that list, one of the biggest bombshells over the last several months in terms of countries that are interested in BRICS. Because what is it about? And I'm going to get into the numbers soon. But what is it about Saudi Arabia that's so important? It's that Saudi Arabia is right now the leading country in the petrodollar arrangement that the United States has relied upon to enforce its economic hegemony upon the planet. So this is why this is so huge for Saudi Arabia with its vast oil resources and the fact that the U.S. has tried to monopolize these oil resources to dictate the global economy. This is set to change, and it might change very soon. So the current BRICS 5 now contribute to 31.5% of global GDP, while the G7 share has fallen to 30%. The BRICS is expected to contribute over 50% of global GDP by 2030, with the proposed enlargement almost certainly bringing that forward. China's GDP actually overtook that of the United States in 2015 when comparing countries in purchasing power parity terms, meaning when you adjust for the currencies, when you compare a basket of commodities to the value of these currencies, actually China is the bigger economy. But the point here is that BRICS is growing. Its percentage of global GDP is growing. And this is huge news because BRICS is so important to the rise of the global south. And now I want to show you an article on this topic from Mint Press News. Everyone follow Mint Press News. They are a great independent media outlet. So the rise of the global south, can BRICS triumph over the IMF and the World Bank, the international financial system? So this author, okay, well, let's see. Mint Press does the authors at the end of the article. So this author, Dr. Ramzi Barod, is a journalist and editor of the Palestine Chronicle. He's going to tell you why BRICS is poised to become an alternative to the international financial system, the Western-dominated, U.S.-dominated, U.S. dollar-dominated Western financial system. So who would have expected that the BRICS nations could rise as the potential rival of the G7 countries, the World Bank, and the IMF combined? But that seemingly distant possibility now has real prospects, which could change the political equilibrium of world politics. So BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and it was coined by the chief economist of Goldman Sachs in 2001 as a reference to the world's emerging economies. It was then known as BRIC, with the S added later when South Africa joined the group in 2009. The first BRICS summit took place in 2009. Then the discussion seemed largely abstract. However, not until 2014 did BRICS begin taking serious steps toward greater integration when the alliance, now including South Africa, launched a new development bank with seed money of over $50 billion. The decision meant that the group was now ready to take its first political steps in challenging the dominance of the West over international monetary institutions, namely the World Bank and the IMF. So one thing about this that's important is that the new development bank now, which has exponentially grown in terms of its capital, the ability to invest, it is now headed by Dilma Rousseff. And remember, Dilma Rousseff was overthrown in a definite US-backed judicial lawfare coup in 2015. And she is now the head of the new development bank as Brazil, with Lula da Silva, is talking about de-dollarization. So all of this is huge. The geopolitical conflict thus shifts resulting from the Ukraine war, however, have proved to be a driving force behind the massive expansion underway of BRICS as powerful countries begin to show interest in the initiative, including Argentina, UAE, Mexico, Algeria, and particularly Saudi Arabia. So here you go again. It's 31.5% of global GDP, ahead of the G7, which is 30.7%. So one of the greatest opportunities and challenges facing BRICS now is its ability to expand its membership base while maintaining current growth. The issue of helping new members maintain economic and political independence is vital. The IMF and World Bank are notorious for stipulating their monetary support of countries, especially in the global south, on political conditions. The position is often justified under the guise of human rights and democracy, though is entirely related to privatization and opening markets for foreign investors, read Western corporations. Exactly. In my book on American exceptionalism, I talk about the case of Mozambique, where Mozambique was totally indebted by the IMF. And in order to meet the conditions of the IMF loans, they had to privatize their healthcare system. And it was the Gates Foundation and these private Western foundations like it, which were able to gobble up Mozambique's health system, and living standards and health standards and life expectancy all declined as a result. So, this is the result of Western financial institutions and how they operate in countries like Mozambique. And this is why BRICS is so important, because it is an alternative, especially as inflation is hitting many Western countries, resulting in slower economic growth, social unrest. Nations in the global south are using this opportunity to develop their economic alternative. This means that BRICS will cease being exclusively economic institutions. It is now very much political. Yes, so that's what I talk about, the lifeboat, right? BRICS is not just a lifeboat, but it is the ship that these huge, really rich, economically emerging, developing economies led by China and Russia are paving the way to. They are building this ship. So, for decades, we've known that the US dollar is the greatest weapon from which to exert its economic dominance, and it's ceased to become a normal currency. It is now, they argue, an actual commodity, where you have wars fought to ensure dollar domination in Iraq, in Libya, in order to keep them committed to the dollar. Following the invasion of Iraq in March 2003, Baghdad returned to selling its oil in US dollars. The struggle over dollar dominance was also painfully felt in Venezuela, which has the world's largest oil reserve, yet was reduced to abject poverty for attempting to challenge the supremacy of Washington in its currency. Though it will take time, the process of lessening reliance on the dollar is in full swing. So I talked about Brazil and China announcing a trade agreement allowing the two countries to use their national currencies, the UN and the reais, respectively, in their trade settlements. And more South American countries are likely to follow suit. We know that Argentina is looking to join BRICS, for example. So one of the main decisions of the finance ministers and central bank governors of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, following the March 30th to 31st meeting in Indonesia, is to reduce reliance on the dollar. So Asia, right? This huge multilateral institution, ASEAN, they are looking to it was in Indonesia where they recently met, and it was said that lessening reliance on the dollar is on the agenda, which is huge, because what has the Biden administration been doing for the last several months? And that is traveling around Asia, attempting to get all of these countries to basically bow down to US diktats, and they've said no. So the BRICS countries in particular are leading the charge to serve as a facilitator for rearranging the world's economic and financial map. And so while the West is busy trying to keep its own economies afloat, it remains weary of the changes underway in the global South, and they ought to be. Following a meeting between US President Joe Biden and 40 African leaders at the White House last December, it was clear few African countries were interested in taking sides in the ongoing war in Ukraine. Consequently, Kamala Harris flew to Africa on March 26th to meet with African leaders to help push them away from China and Russia, and that failed. So the president of Ghana on March 28th, this is what he had to say. There may be an obsession in America about Chinese activity on the continent, but there's no such obsession here. Akufo-Addo, the president, Nana Akufo-Addo, the president of Ghana, said to the media. To argue BRICS is purely economic is to ignore a large part of the story. The timing of BRICS' expansion, its stern political discourse of member states, potential members and allies, the repeated visits of Russian and Chinese diplomats to Africa and other regions of the global South, etc., indicate that BRICS has become the South's new platform for geopolitics and economy. The more successful BRICS becomes, the weaker Western hegemony over the South will grow. Though some Western politicians and media insist on downplaying the importance of BRICS' role in shaping the New World Order, the change seems to be real and irreversible. So that's a huge article. That really sums it up, because I wanted to talk to you about the politics of BRICS, because it's not just about what will happen. We don't know how long it's going to take to actually institute de-dollarization. It's extremely complicated. The global economy is pegged to the dollar. It is the international, it is the international reserve currency The Bretton Woods institution still dominates. So it's going to be a little while until these countries can figure that out. And also, there is the danger that by trying to de-dollarize, the escalations from the United States and its vassal states, its collective West, especially in Western Europe, their reaction will be that much more intense because these countries don't necessarily want to cut themselves off from US and European economic activity. That in and of itself would cause economic shockwaves. What they want to do is assert sovereignty and have the institutional power to do so. And so that's what BRICS is. It's the institutional power to exert economic sovereignty, and de-dollarization will be a key part of that. Integration will be a key part of that. BRICS is in part an economic integration institution, just like the Belt and Road Initiative on the China side, the Eurasian Economic Union on the Russian side, just like the SCO on the Chinese side, Russian side, and many other countries, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. All of these institutions are about integrating economically so that sovereignty is strengthened rather than the US's version of globalization, the collective West version of globalization, which is to expand Western and US, especially multinational corporate power over these countries, over the Mozambiques, over the Algerias, over the Venezuelas, over the Ukraines, right? Over these countries which the United States seeks to turn into their puppets, their vassals, so they can loot from them. That is the difference that China, Russia, South Africa, India, Brazil, by coming together in this way, they are saying that there is a new economic order that is possible. And it's huge that already in such a short amount of time, we are talking about, everyone, we are talking about a very short amount of time. This alliance is only 14 years old, right? It's only 14 years old. And South Africa's only been a part of it for less than a decade. And we've heard South Africa be very committed to this multilateral institution, to the BRICS model. So much so that they invited Saudi Arabia to talk about joining BRICS, that it was in South Africa, right, in Johannesburg, that Saudi officials said that they were interested in joining BRICS. I mean, that's how integrated things are becoming. And that's how huge BRICS surpassing the G7 is economically in GDP terms really amounts to. It really amounts to a huge shift in the global political and economic order. And the naysayers, right? The naysayers are the ones who are actually committed to dollar domination. They don't have the vision and the foresight like these countries do and their leaders do in trying to chart a course forward regardless of political affiliation, regardless of how they organize their own systems internally. They are saying we can put that aside. We can increase the assets involved in the new development bank, the BRICS development bank, in order to facilitate infrastructure development, in order to facilitate this process of de-dollarization. That's why it's so important when leaders like Lula da Silva, Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin talk about de-dollarization, we should take them seriously. When Saudi Arabia expresses interest in joining BRICS, we should take it seriously because this is happening faster than anyone could have imagined. There was an old commentator I used to follow just based on his positions on BRICS and the countries within it, Patrick Bond. And Patrick Bond has this theory of sub-imperialism, meaning that there are smaller imperialist states, basically equating China, Russia, India, etc., as imperialist states. And the reason why they're imperialist states is because they're not pure socialists and they're not charting a new course forward, that they're trying to use the tools essentially of the world economic system, the dominant economic system, which was built by the collective West to assert their own interests. And this is being proven wrong over and over and over again, because as these countries have grown together and apart. But as they've grown in the BRICS alliance, what has happened for all of them? All of them have seen massive improvements to their standard of living. All of them have seen massive economic growth. All of them, especially Russia, especially India, especially China, these countries have been able to withstand shockwaves that no other country in the global south really is in a position to do. So you have India, despite all of its contradictions, all of its problems, has actually reduced extreme poverty significantly, despite the fact that there's still a long way to go. China has eliminated extreme poverty, and Russia has withstood economic sanctions, thousands of economic sanctions upon it from the most powerful economies in the world, mainly the United States and the EU countries. Yet it still stands and it is still going strong. If it weren't for alliances like BRICS, these countries in the global south would be in a lot worse shape. And that is just fact. And that's why the sub-imperialist model, the sub-imperialist narrative, this narrative that these countries should be dismissed because they're using the tools of the existing economic order, is foolish. Because look at all these countries with all these different social systems that want to join the BRICS alliance. Look at how the multilateral institutions like BRICS is including all countries, whether they're socialist or capitalist or whatever they may be. They include all of these countries. They want the biggest number of countries possible to be arranging a new path out of US hegemony. So that is a good thing, right? And so this is huge news. I wanted to cover it with all of you. It is good news that BRICS is growing, that the BRICS countries in GDP terms are growing. That's going to continue. And why is it going to continue? Well, because the future of industry, the future of economic growth, the future of public and private infrastructure, but really the future of humanity and the rising standard of living that humanity demands in this modern era all rest in these countries, particularly China. Particularly China. It rests in China. And then you have Russia also growing significantly. India is growing significantly. And you see the Western media trying to divide China and India by saying, oh, well, India now is going to be more populous by the second half of 2023. So does that mean China's in trouble? No, it doesn't. Because guess what? Economics are not determined by population alone. Economics are determined by what kind of plan do you have? What kind of economic system do you have? And what kind of prospects, what kind of growth prospects do you have within your country as well as without? How are you organizing? How are you going about expanding and growing your economy? China grew 4.5% in the first quarter of this year. I think it's going to do all right, and the projections are only going up. Russia is set to have positive growth despite thousands of sanctions. India is set to grow. South Africa, Brazil are all set to improve their lot given the strengthening multipolar order. So things are looking up for BRICS, and it's only a matter of time. It's time is on the side of the global south. It's only a matter of time before de-dollarization is a reality.